Did you ever start a presentation with an excuse like, I know you can't read my slides, or I'm not a native speaker? In this video, you're going to learn my famous no excuses policy for public speaking. And by the end of the video, you're going to learn how to stop apologizing on stage. How's it going? My name is Markus. I'm a stand-up comedian and TEDx speaker, helping you bring more fun to the corporate stage. On this channel, I share a lot of public speaking tips about how you can better engage with your audience, whether that's on stage or on video. So if you're new here, please consider subscribing. So today we are talking about excuses, and let me give you a brief overview of what's on the agenda today. And we're specifically talking about making excuses when you're doing different kinds of public speaking. So first I'm going to talk about making excuses for yourself. After that, I'm going to move on to an even bigger problem. This is when you make excuses for other speakers. After that, I'm going to give you a few examples of how that actually hurts your confidence and credibility as a speaker. After that, I'm going to look at a few benefits of implementing this no excuses policy that I've developed. And finally, I'm going to give you a few ideas of what you can do instead of making excuses. At any point in this video, have a look at at any point in this video, have a look in the description below. Below this video, there's links to everything I'm talking about. There you can also pick up my free video conferencing checklist. So let's check out the description below. So let's dive right into this training here with examples of you making excuses for yourself. For example, you go up there and you say, I'm not as experienced as the previous speaker. Here's another one. I didn't have time to prepare. Number 3, I'm not a native speaker. That's the one I mentioned before. Number 4, I'm not going to go through all of my slides. I bet you've heard this on the corporate stage. Why do you even have the slides if you're not going to go through them? Number 5, the text on my slides is too small to read from the back. And number 6, and this is relevant to the current situation where we're coming out of this lockdown, you might say something like, I haven't been on stage for 4 months. So these are all excuses that we often make for ourselves, and we're going to learn how to get rid of them in this training. And here's the thing with these excuses. They actually don't add anything to your presentation, and that's why we should try to get rid of it. But even more relevant, they don't add any value to your audience. So look at it from the perspective of your audience members, not from the perspective of how you're feeling inside. Now let's look at the examples where we make excuses for others. Number 1, I know you got this assignment last minute. I bet you've heard that. You're making an excuse for somebody else. Or how about this? This next speaker has really been improving a lot lately. Now, that may not sound like an excuse, and it may sound like it's well intended, but it's actually not, because you're comparing them to something else that actually adds no value at all. Number 3, in the examples of others, this is something that I experienced last year when I was in Edinburgh. I was there for the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, which is a huge performing arts and comedy festival. And I was fortunate enough to be able to perform a few stand-up comedy sets on my friend's show. After my performance, the MC comes up and says, oh, well, we can see that Markus is a bit of a new comedian here, but I understand why, because in Switzerland, you don't have so many comedy shows. We in London, because he was based in London, we in London, we can gig every night. So I understand why he's not so good. So he was making an excuse for me afterwards. Also didn't add any value to the show. And number 4, of excuses for others. I know one more point about that point. So that these excuses, they can actually come before the speaker or after. Like in that example from the comedy show, that was an excuse afterwards. But it also happens that speakers make excuses for others when they introduce them. Both should be avoided. And finally, we have a number 5 here, and this is not so clear-cut. This is something that we see when somebody is doing, for example, a comedy show for the first time. They may want to be introduced or may not want to be introduced as doing this for the first time. So if you say something like our next comedian is going to try stand-up comedy for the first time, that may be okay, especially if the performer is okay with it. But I'm going to give you an example of how to handle that a little bit better later on in this video. Hey, hit the like button if you got some value out of these examples already. So now let's move on to why are these excuses actually a problem? And I'm going to walk you through a number of different perspectives of why excuses are problematic. Firstly, they destroy your confidence. As soon as you start your presentation with an excuse like this, you're already taking a hit for your confidence. Not a great way to start. Reason number 2 is that we should be judged on our performance there and then, not based on our performance in some other stage at some other time. So for example, this is extra important for contests. When you're doing a contest, whether that's a Toastmasters contest or a comedy contest or whatever it may be, we should be judged on our performance there and then, not some other instance. So that's why these kinds of excuses where we talk about this person has really improved, completely irrelevant. Reason number 3 why excuses are problematic is that they actually don't add any benefit. There is no benefit of making an excuse. And I'll give you an example of, let's say that I come up there and say that I'm not very prepared for this particular presentation. Let's use that as an example. If I'm not prepared and it's obvious in the show, me saying so doesn't actually help anybody. However, if I'm unprepared and it doesn't show, nobody actually notices, I can only win with this, because if nobody notices, it's never a problem, and I don't win anything by mentioning it. Then we'll look at reason number 4, which is that especially when we make excuses for other people, we should not speculate on the motivations of others. We don't know if the person really got the assignment late or if they had a stressful day or whatever it is. We shouldn't speculate on the motivations of others. It adds nothing. I'm going to do 2 more reasons why this is problematic. And this is number 5. It's this old saying that it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. So certainly, if you screw up, it's certainly okay to say, hey, I'm sorry I screwed up, but do that afterwards, once you know what the facts actually are. Don't ask permission, don't make an excuse before something actually happens. And then number 6 here, this is something that we see in digital media, in YouTube videos and podcasts. There are many of these content creators who start out by saying something like, I'm sorry I haven't posted anything this week, or I'm sorry the release of this podcast episode took a month. I understand that you want to build a relationship with your fans and you want to have that consistent relationship. However, you have no idea when the audience is going to consume that. If they are listening to that podcast episode 2 years afterwards, they're not going to care about something that happened 2 years ago in your arbitrarily decided release schedule. So don't start your podcast or YouTube video or whatever it is by making an excuse about the schedule, because nobody really cares, especially in the long run. So as we move over to some solutions here, I've been talking a lot about problems, but now we're going to talk about some solutions while I a little bit dab my face here. The solution that I propose is, of course, that you implement a no excuses policy. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you don't make excuses on stage. You don't make excuses for yourself, and you don't make excuses for others. That's the whole policy. It's a simple policy. But I'm going to give you some examples of how it can actually work. But hey, if you got some value so far from this video, hit the like button. So let's talk about the benefits of the no excuses policy. The most important one is probably that you get more confidence. When you eliminate these excuses from your speech, you come across as way more confident in the eyes of the audience. And it's actually in the eyes of the audience, that's what matters. Reason number 2, let's say benefit number 2 of this policy is that it is a leadership quality. Leaders don't make excuses for themselves or for others. If you're a leader of a team, you take responsibility for what the team has done. So by eliminating excuses from your speech, you are training your leadership capabilities and your leadership skills. And the third benefit is that it's a more efficient use of time. So I'm not proposing that we replace the excuses with anything. My proposal is that we just eliminate them, and that actually cuts down on unnecessary things that we're saying on stage. So I'm going to give you some examples here, what you actually can do instead of making excuses. But hey, if you got some value out of this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I post here every week different public speaking tips that are going to help you engage better with your audience. Sometimes it's about things I've learned from the comedy club, sometimes it's video conferencing advice, and sometimes it's kind of more deep public speaking advice like the video you're watching right now. So let's move over to what you can actually do instead. And I have for you 7 suggestions that are going to help you to eliminate those excuses. So suggestion number 1 is that you prepare better. If your problem is that you're going to make excuses for not being prepared, then just prepare better. Easy solution, maybe obvious, but I think important. Number 2 is that also you should learn to adapt to changing circumstances. For example, I was going to give this workshop originally as a face-to-face workshop here in Basel, Switzerland. And then because of the current situation, I actually had to move it online. I adapted to the situation instead of making an excuse about why I can't do it. Here is tip number 3, what you can do instead. You can also give up your spot. Now this may work well and not so well depending on your situation. But if you're one of the 10 comedians on an open mic night, if you drop out, that is not such a big problem. It actually means that the other speakers will have a little bit more time. So if you really are not able to do it, then you can actually give up your spot. If it's a smaller group of people, then that may get you into some trouble. Then we have method number 4, and that is that you can actually do a shorter performance. And this is once again in the case when you're not so prepared. So let's say that you have a 5-minute spot in a comedy show and you only have 3 minutes of material. One way you can do it is you can say, hey, I'm sorry that I only have 3 minutes, but if you want to get rid of excuses, here's what you do instead. Instead of saying that, you say, guys, that's all I have. I'm going to give the remaining minutes back to the room. And that is something that people appreciate, especially in like an open mic comedy show, for example. Nobody has ever complained that their performance was too short. Deep public speaking truth there. Here's method number 5, and that is to change your attitude. If you change your attitude and you say that even if you're not prepared, or even if you're not a native speaker, or even if people can't read your slides, just change your attitude, just do it anyway. If you get the assignment 5 minutes before you have to do it, just change your attitude and say, I'm going to make the best of this particular situation. It's not going to be great, but I'm going to really put a lot of effort into it instead of spending time making excuses about the situation. I have 2 more of these. Here's number 6. This is what I was talking about before, when it's a new performer on stage. And so often what happens when it's a new comedian, for example, they might say something like, hey, it's my first time, please be gentle. And I understand where this is coming from, but I've heard that 100 times from 100 new performers. But there's a way that you can turn that into something really much more positive. For example, you can say, guys, this is my first time on stage. I'm super excited to be here. Same context, same data, but you just frame it differently. You're not making an excuse. And here's the other example. In the current situation, when people have not been on stage for 4 or 5 months, you could, of course, say, hey, I haven't done this for 4 months. I hope I still know what I'm doing. And in fact, this is what I did myself at the comedy shows as we were getting started in June. So, not a great solution. What I should have done instead is something like, guys, I am so happy to be back on stage after all this time. Turn it from an excuse into something more positive. And I wish that I had done that back in June. So here's the bottom line about excuses. There is no value to the audience in making these excuses. And that is the main reason why you should get rid of it. In everything you do on stage, you should ask, are you actually adding value to your audience? And these excuses, the examples that we talked about today, they don't add any value to the audience. If you implement this no excuses policy, you will come across as more confident on stage, and that will translate to a better audience experience for them as well. Hey, speaking of confidence, there's another thing that's very hard to do on stage, and that is to ask for applause. I'll give you one example. Here's one thing you can do, for example. You could say, guys, you have been a wonderful audience. Please give a huge round of applause for your MC or your host. If you want to find 4 more ways of asking for applause in a smooth way, check out the video on the screen now. In that workshop, I'm going to give you 5 different ways for asking for applause. Also, remember to grab my free video conferencing checklist. The links are in the description below. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.